Hello everyone. Thank you all for watching the video and leaving such heartfelt comments. Wishing the whole family good health and peace. Hello everyone, Tu Diepp here. Thank you all for your continuous support and care throughout the time. I wish everyone great health and happiness. I hope you enjoy watching this video and feel relaxed. Today, let's continue Diep's journey. James arrived at the woodworking factory, the familiar sound of machinery filling the air as he walked towards the workers. The smell of freshly cut wood greeted him as he entered the large warehouse. His eyes scanned the room, and he noted the piles of timber stacked neatly. Seems like the wood delivery is quite large today. About 30 tons, right? James asked, his voice calm but attentive. Yes, it should be enough for us to finish the orders this month. As long as the weather holds up, of course, replied Tuan, the factory manager. James looked out the window, his thoughts momentarily interrupted by the weather. We can only hope it doesn't rain. We don't want any delays, he muttered under his breath. He walked closer to Tuan, who was examining the newly delivered wood. The quality of this batch looks good, doesn't it? Tuan nodded, brushing his hand against the rough texture of the timber. I checked it thoroughly, sir. Everything seems fine. James raised an eyebrow. Since the incident with Mr. Z, we have to be extra cautious, you know? We can't afford any mistakes. I understand, Tuan said, his tone more serious now. I've made sure to be more diligent with the checks. James gave him a nod of approval. Good. And the rest of the work? Is everything running smoothly? Tuan hesitated for a moment before replying. Well, actually, we've been facing some challenges. A lot of the workers have been taking leave recently. Since the company took a hit, it's been tough to keep up with the workload. James frowned, his face growing more serious. I see. That's problematic. What are we doing to keep things running smoothly? Honestly, it's been tough. We've had to hire some new workers, but we're short-handed. Some of the workers are still on leave after the incident, Tuan explained. James paused for a moment thinking, we need to find a way to motivate the new employees. How about offering some incentives? Maybe we could increase their wages or give them extra benefits. It could help improve morale. Tuan agreed. That's a good idea. I'll put together a plan for the incentives and wage adjustments. I'll send it to you for approval. Make sure the plan is well thought out, and if it makes sense, we'll implement it. We can't afford to lose any more time, James said, his voice firm but understanding. Understood, sir. I'll get on it right away, Tuan replied. James looked around at the factory floor, the workers moving diligently despite the challenges. Is there anything else we need to address right now? He asked, his gaze scanning the room. No, everything else is under control for now, Tuan assured him. All right. Keep me posted if anything else comes up, James said, then turned to leave, feeling the weight of the challenges ahead. But with his team's dedication and a little strategic planning, he was confident they could weather the storm. After a long, tiring journey from abroad, James' mother arrived home. It had been years since she had seen this house, and stepping through the door felt like stepping back into a part of her past. The house had remained untouched for 3 years, but somehow it still felt familiar, still alive with the echoes of memories. James' father, always the attentive and caring husband, took her suitcase from her hands with a warm smile. Let me carry this for you. You go inside first, he said, his voice filled with love. No, let me do it. I'll take it to the room and put it away, James' mother replied, her voice calm but filled with a sense of nostalgia. Together, they stepped into the house. The moment she walked in, James' father noticed the light in her eyes as she took in the familiar sights. This house hasn't been lived in for 3 years, but it still feels so new, he said, his gaze sweeping over the furniture and decor, which had been left untouched as if waiting for her return. James' mother sighed in relief, feeling a sense of home. She walked out into the yard, feeling the cool breeze brush against her face. The air in Vietnam is wonderful, isn't it? She remarked, her voice tinged with awe as she closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, savoring the refreshing scent of the countryside. Absolutely, James' father agreed with a soft smile, his gaze fixed on her, warm and full of affection. It really is nice to be home. After a short pause, James' mother turned to him, her expression softening but tinged with concern. "Where is our son? I miss him so much. Please call him here," she said, her voice betraying the deep longing she felt for her son. James' father smiled gently, the sadness in his eyes only briefly flickering before he replied, "Our son is staying at the old house up in the hills. He's always loved nature, so he decided to live there, in a wooden house a little further away." Her heart sank. She had hoped for something more immediate, but she quickly masked her disappointment. "Well, yesterday I hired people to clean here. So why don't I rest here for now? Why don't you bring me to stay with him, instead of all this cleaning work?" James' father paused, sensing her growing distress. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Let's let you rest here for now. Our son will visit us soon enough. He'll be here before you know it," he said, his voice soothing and warm. James' mother smiled faintly, but her heart ached. She nodded and decided to accept his words. "All right, I'll rest here for now. But when he comes, I want to see him immediately." They both stepped into the house, where the stillness was palpable. James' father took a moment to glance around the empty rooms. This house, despite being unoccupied for so long, still has that sense of warmth, he said softly. James' mother, still holding on to her quiet sadness, spoke up once more. "Don't you remember why our son left Vietnam?" Her voice trembled slightly, her gaze piercing as she searched his face for answers. James' father sighed deeply, and the weight of the question seemed to crush him. His eyes darkened as he looked out the window, lost in thought. "He hasn't been able to move past the pain yet," he murmured, the sadness in his voice unmasked. "You just returned from the airport. You should rest first, and we can deal with this later." She felt a deep ache in her chest, hearing the sorrow in his words. She looked around the empty house, the silence around her amplifying the loneliness she felt. "I know he can't accept it yet," she whispered. "I feel so sorry for him. He's such a good boy. James has always been obedient, sweet, and so loving." James' father sat down next to her, holding her hand gently. He knew the heartache they both carried, and he was filled with regret. "Actually, the fault is mine. I should have done things differently." "It's not your fault," he said softly, his voice full of remorse. Tears welled up in James' mother's eyes as she turned to look at him. "But I miss him so much," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just want him to be happy again." James' father brushed a strand of hair away from her face, offering what little comfort he could. "I know you miss him, and I miss him too. But you've just come back from abroad, and you need to rest. Tomorrow when you're feeling better, we'll go see him. Everything will be okay." She smiled weakly, still holding on to the hope that one day, things would heal. "I'll visit him tomorrow. I'll wait until I'm stronger." As she started to head toward her room, a car's engine roared outside, startling James' father. He looked out the window and his eyes widened with surprise. "Your father's car is here." James' mother paused, a sudden flash of memory flickering in her mind. Her hand froze, and for a moment she didn't know what to say. But she smiled gently, then walked into the room, leaving behind her turbulent thoughts. James' father sat comfortably in the living room, enjoying a quiet evening with his wife after a long day. They had just finished dinner, the warm glow of the table lamps casting a soft light around the room. As they relaxed, James' father couldn't help but bring up a topic that had been on his mind. "You know," he began, looking at his wife with a thoughtful expression, "I met a remarkable young woman at the market today." His wife turned her head, intrigued. "Who is she?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "It's a girl named Diep," James' father said, his voice carrying a tone of admiration. "She's only 22, but she's already working so hard. I could see it in her eyes. She's determined, and not just in the way she works. There's a fire in her that tells me she wants something more from life. I find that quite impressive." His wife nodded slowly, processing his words. "I remember James mentioning her once. She sells tomatoes, right?" "Yes," he replied, a smile forming on his face as he thought back to their brief conversation. She was so polite, so genuine. Despite her young age, she's already handling the struggles of life with such maturity. She's working hard to support her family, and you can tell she has big dreams. even though she's been through a lot. There was a pause as James' mother leaned back in her chair, reflecting on what her husband had said. It's rare to find someone with such strength, especially at her age. I wonder what her dreams are. But I can see why James would take an interest in her. She sounds like the kind of person who could make him reconsider a lot of things in life. Exactly, James' father agreed. She doesn't just sell tomatoes. She has a certain way about her. A sense of purpose that I believe James could learn a lot from. She might not have everything, but she knows how to work for it. And that's something James needs to understand. Life isn't always about taking the easiest route. James' mother looked at him thoughtfully, her expression softening. You're right. Sometimes I think James forgets the simple things in life. He's so caught up in work, in what he can achieve, but there's so much more to living. Maybe this Diep, with her humble nature and determination, could help him see that. I'm glad you met her. James' father leaned forward, his voice a little quieter but filled with emotion. She reminded me a lot of how James was when he was younger. Full of potential, eager, but perhaps lacking the right kind of guidance. Diep is the kind of person who could challenge him in the best way. I see in her what I wish I had seen in James earlier, on a sense of grounded purpose. His wife smiled, her heart swelling with hope. If they do meet again, I think it could be good for both of them. James needs someone who will not only support him but also challenge him to grow. I don't want him to keep making the same mistakes. James' father nodded, his thoughts lingering on the potential changes that could come from James meeting Diep. I know. If she and James could spend more time together, I think she could be the one to help him get back on track, to make him realize that there's more to life than just success in business. There's also success in kindness, humility, and making meaningful connections. They both sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on the conversation. James' mother spoke softly, her voice full of warmth. I hope James can find the same kind of balance. Maybe this Diep is the person who could show him that, in her own quiet way. Maybe, James' father replied, a thoughtful expression on his face. Sometimes, it's the people we least expect who end up teaching us the most important lessons in life. Their conversation drifted to other topics, but both knew that this meeting with Diep could be the turning point for their son. They both silently hoped that in time James would come to realize what he had before him. Someone who could help him grow, not just in his career, but in life as well.
Thiểu số ở vùng núi. Dân tộc thiểu số là những nhóm dân tộc có một số lượng rất là ít so với dân tộc đa số trong một số quốc gia và vùng lãnh thổ. Tại Việt Nam có 54 dân tộc thiểu số, chiếm khoảng 15% tổng dân số của Việt Nam. Một số dân tộc thiểu số tại Việt Nam bao gồm như người Tày, sinh sống chủ yếu tại các tỉnh phía Bắc, Lạng Sơn, Cao Bằng, Bắc Kạn. Người Thái sinh sống chủ yếu ở các tỉnh phía Bắc như Sơn La, Điện Biên, Lai Châu. Người Mông sinh sống chủ yếu tại các tỉnh phía Tây Bắc như Hà Giang, Lào Cai, Yên Bái. Thường gắn liền với các dân tộc thiểu số, mỗi dân tộc có những phong tục tập quán riêng biệt. Dưới đây là một số phong tục tập quán phổ biến ở vùng núi. Lễ hội truyền thống. Các dân tộc thiểu số ở vùng núi thường tổ chức nhiều lễ hội truyền thống như lễ hội Chon Cham Tray của người Khmer, lễ hội Gầu Tàu của người Mông, lễ hội Lồng Tồng của người Tày. Tập quán cưới hỏi. Phong tục cưới hỏi ở vùng núi thường rất đặc sắc, như việc tổ chức lễ cưới tập thể, lễ cưới truyền thống với nhiều nghi thức phức tạp. Tập quán tang lễ. Phong tục tang lễ ở vùng núi thường rất đặc biệt, như việc tổ chức lễ tang truyền thống với nhiều nghi thức phức tạp